Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, and today, live on June the 17th, I got another round of stories to get to today on today's show. We're going to start off with Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys, figuring out that Dak is going to be their priority to start the year. Then, as we get later on into the show, we're going to talk about the discussion around that I was thinking about with Trevor Lawrence and these quarterbacks now getting their extensions. Is it a better situation now for the market to dictate what these teams do, or is it still a valuable explanation to determine what a contract will be based on the player performance? Then, moving on, we're going to talk about a TikTok video that was discovered today on social media, and Brandon Ayuk seemingly putting an end to the contract talks between him and the San Francisco 49ers. So I'll get into those stories and much more on today's show. And as always, if you would, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and as well as remembering, if you have any questions or comments, please use the tip and donations link that you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using this, I'm able to see your question or comment, in that way address anything you guys say and get your guys' perspective and thoughts on anything on the show. It's a massive help for the show and the network, so please, if you would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. But like I mentioned before, jumping into the first segment, the Cowboys establishing Dak Prescott as a priority. This is a little bit out of the blue for me, just because of my standpoint on Dak, but I will get into that after I give a bit more context around this situation. You know, it's becoming a tight race so far in the quarterback market, in free agency in this offseason, between Green Bay, the Cowboys, and the Miami Dolphins to get a deal worked out for their quarterbacks because of the rising quarterback market. Tua, Dak, and Jordan Love have all made a great case to earn those top deals, and it is becoming a lot tighter, especially after that Trevor Lawrence contract extension a few days ago. Then you have this past weekend on ESPN with one of their NFL insiders, Jeremy Fowler, reporting that on SportsCenter, saying, "You've got Dak Prescott. The Cowboys have a world of problems here financially with 3 players they have to sign, Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb as well. But the feeling around the league and sources I've talked to is that they want to start with Dak. They put it on the table with Dak's people that, hey, look, you're a priority. We want to try and get something done. As far as hard dollars, not a lot of progress yet. I would describe their efforts so far as passive." And that surprised me a little bit, just because Dak is already coming off a contract extension, coming off of that 4-year, $160 million deal that he already previously got from the Dallas Cowboys. And the Cowboys already picked up the 5th-year option on Micah Parsons' deal, as well as CeeDee Lamb. So they do have some time. They bought themselves some time there with Micah Parsons, but not so much CeeDee Lamb, because he is now on that 5th year and he will be a free agent next offseason if no contract extension is finalized. So Dak now being the priority, I get it. It makes sense. You know, the quarterback, the most important position in the NFL. But is this the right standpoint to have if you're the Dallas Cowboys? I thought of a few points that, raise some questions to support potentially the other side. If you aren't a supporter of Dak, if you don't think Dak should get this extension, I'm not saying he shouldn't, based on any other feelings except just on his performance. The biggest question with me is, at some point, or at what point I should say, do you start wondering, how far is Dak into his development? Have we reached the ceiling, especially in the playoffs, where that has become the narrative around the Dallas Cowboys? How much better can he give out of his playoff performances that we are willing to give him 55, 54, maybe 57, $60 million per year on his next contract extension? So far now, with a lot of teams paying these quarterbacks, they want to get better, make more playoff appearances, and make more progress deeper in the playoffs. But the Dallas Cowboys are already there, and I'm not saying it's just all on their roster. It has nothing to do with Dak. Dak has certainly played a massive part in where they've gone and how successful they have been. But with that being said, it now just shifts. Now the expectations sort of shift a little bit more. The field goal sort of moves a little bit. The posts keep moving. The media keeps moving. The standard so far set for the Dallas Cowboys. And with them constantly being in the playoffs, winning the division, I think moving the expectations is fair on that point because you have to at least get better as you keep going. And with Dak being 2-5 in the playoffs so far, and this roster already being very good as it is, you have to wonder, at what point, at least for me as a fan, if I'm watching, how much more can this quarterback give us if we're going to just continue to make the playoffs and have the same results as we have had in previous years? And I know if you've watched this show, I've been a big advocate of Mike Tomlin. Not as much playoff success as other coaches, similar to Dak Prescott, not too successful in the playoffs, but I'm always advocating to keep him there, keep the consistency going, and it's always a great thing for a coach because you can't always find that in somebody else if you decide to move on from Mike Tomlin. But in the same breath, I might be contradicting myself in that aspect, but the Steelers, me as a Steelers fan, we're not paying Mike Tomlin $60 million, $55 million, the highest paid contract in the NFL to stay with the Steelers. That's the biggest difference. You're allocating a lot of money to Dak, who is only 30 years old. I'm not saying he is definitely not going to get better, but at some point as well, you have to just think about it. Maybe we've reached the limit here with Dak, at least with Dak and the Cowboys. Maybe he goes on somewhere else and does great. Maybe the chemistry, the cooperation with the Dallas Cowboys just has reached its limit. He could go out and try his luck somewhere else, and that could work. But for right now, I think the Cowboys find themselves in a weird spot because if you look at the other two options, like Jeremy Fowler mentioned, CeeDee and Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons, it's nice that you can get it pushed back a little bit more because he is not a free agent until 2026. But with CeeDee Lamb, he is younger. He has produced at a great level, arguably to match Justin Jefferson for the highest paid wide receiver. But the Dallas Cowboys can't afford to have one of the highest paid quarterbacks, highest paid receiver, the highest paid outside linebacker or edge rusher once Micah Parsons is due for his extension. And what's funny about this, I think many people won't mention it, that if Dak wasn't a quarterback, I think up to this point, if you have these two other positions that you do need extensions, I don't think he would be the first priority. And I don't think that's too crazy to say for Dak. Just because he's a quarterback, he wouldn't be the first priority, at least in my mind, because the quarterbacks just shoot up to the top of the list because you need that, as we've seen in recent years, in recent games. Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Jared Goff now with the Lions, Brock Purdy with the 49ers. You need that quarterback for as talented as your team is. The 49ers are a great example. Great roster, all-star roster, but once Brock Purdy went down in that game, there was no chance at all anymore for them to contend in that game. Everybody turned the TV off because they knew there was no chance that the 49ers could compete with the Eagles. So from that standpoint, I think, again, you have to just monitor it and try to keep it as fair as possible based on the production. That's a big, point for me, a big decision maker for me when I'm looking at these contracts, who deserves what, who deserves to get paid over another guy at his same position. If Dak wasn't a quarterback, would he be the priority right now instead of CeeDee and Micah Parsons? I think it makes a good case that he wouldn't be, but just because that position is so held to a high standard, it really just shoots him up that list. And also, Dak is the priority right now, as the Cowboys have said, but to me, that does come with a little bit of context and a little bit of a stipulation because he could be the priority right now, and it's interesting to mention him as a priority because they are competing in a sense with the Packers, I'm forgetting their names now, the Dolphins, as well as some of those teams to sign their quarterbacks. And say Tua or Jordan Love get that contract extension before Dak Prescott and they reset the market, or they get close to 55 million, 54, 55, or maybe over that, and they reset the market. I think at that point, the Cowboys have to reevaluate their statement that Dak is a priority, because he could be the priority right now once you still have it in that range of $55 million. I think they could cough up that and then still sign Micah or CeeDee. I don't think both, but if that becomes the case, I think you could sign at least one of them and keep Dak. But if the Dolphins or the Packers beat the Cowboys to signing their quarterbacks first and they get a ton of money, maybe reset the market, then I think the Cowboys have to backtrack a little bit and say, all right, we want to keep our quarterback, but we can't physically, logistically pay as much as Dak might want now that Tua or Jordan Love have gone over 55, over $57 million. We just can't pay that for a quarterback and still expect to sign at least one of the other guys in their positions. That's just not fair in my estimation to those other guys who I think have still a lot more room to grow and a lot more impact to be made than Dak, at least with the Dallas Cowboys. And also, just as the last point to sort of play devil's advocate here to my point that I'm making, you could say that there are other wide receiver options out there, or there are more wide receiver options out there. If you were to move on from CeeDee Lamb, you definitely have more receiving options out there than you would have quarterbacks, because it's easy to say, from my standpoint, that Dak has sort of reached the limit with the Cowboys, but at the same time, if you do move on from him, who do you have there waiting to try and sign, to try and lure in free agency to come be your starting quarterback? Is Trey Lance that guy? Do you have that much confidence in him? I wouldn't, because you haven't seen any film of him so far in the NFL, really. So there is that option to sort of flip it on its head if you want to keep Dak and maybe you have more receiving options to potentially move on from CeeDee Lamb, but I don't see that happening. I think they keep CeeDee Lamb. I think they keep Micah Parsons, and at the same time, it's just interesting to talk about with Dak being the priority now. It does come with a little bit of context and a little bit of stipulation there, because it is very much give or take right now with these teams, monitoring how the Packers do it, how the Miami Dolphins do it. I expect one of these deals to get done before training camp here in the next 4 to 5 weeks. So who that is will have a big determining factor on the rest of these quarterbacks. But for right now, we'll leave this discussion here, and we're going to move on with the rest of the show. We're going to get into more of a deeper discussion around the quarterbacks in the next segment, talking about this whole idea of the contracts being handed out based on production or just based on what every other team does, and not trying to be left to be last in extending your quarterback. I think there's a lot more to dig into there, and we will dig more into that after this break. You are watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and diving straight away into the second segment, talking about this discussion I've been thinking about over the last few days with the quarterback market and deciding how these quarterbacks really just get their extensions over the last few days, really mentioning Trevor Lawrence and how he has reset the market based on, really, in my opinion, how just based on all the other teams, he's getting an extension because the Jaguars don't want to be left to last in figuring out their quarterback situation. So Lawrence joins Jared Goff as the only other quarterback to agree to an extension this offseason. Jared Goff got his contract extension, giving him $53 million per year. Then you have Trevor Lawrence, who exceeds Jared Goff's contract, and he now makes tied for first in the NFL at $55 million. With Joe Burrow for the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. as a starter, I do give the Jacksonville Jaguars credit because I agree in the standpoint of figuring out your contract situation first before anything else, to just get it out of the way, to focus on football. You don't have this dragging on the entire offseason, potentially into the regular season. I don't want that. I credit the Jaguars for getting it all situated, getting it all fixed, and doing that before anybody else. I agree with that point. But at the same time, $55 million for Trevor Lawrence. Are we judging these quarterbacks and how much money we just give out to these guys based on what they have done, the production they've given us, and projecting what they can be? Is that really the benchmark anymore? Or at least seems that it is trending that way based on this contract, based on what Tua could get, on what Jordan Love could get, and just these other quarterbacks around the NFL. Seemingly, it seems that the Jaguars, the Packers, and the Dallas Cowboys are just watching what each of them does, and then if they could agree to something with their quarterback first before any of the other teams, they're going to go ahead and do it because they're more afraid of what could happen afterwards. Maybe they pay a little bit more, maybe they lose their quarterback and now they're left without other options, and those are obviously massive problems to have. But again, I think it all just depends on the situation. Just starting off with Jared Goff, over the last 2 years, to me, he was worth the investment of $53 million per year, because if you look at the last 2 seasons in 2022, he has given you over 4,400 passing yards, at least 29 touchdowns in both seasons, and also has thrown no more than 12 interceptions in each season, with a QBR no less than 60 in each of those 2 years. And now, those are great numbers to have. You look at the playoff performances and how the Lions are trending upwards in trajectory since they got Jared Goff and building the team around him, around Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, all these young guys, but really with Jared Goff as the centerpiece and being that driving force, that leader out there on the field. He, to me, was worth that investment because the Lions have tried other quarterbacks so far before this Jared Goff era, and it hasn't really worked. Dan Campbell and the Lions bet a lot on Jared Goff, and he turned out very well. You see how close they were to reaching a Super Bowl in this second year with the Lions. So to me, that is worth the investment of nearing the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. Not to say that he even got there. He was around there, and I think any Lions fan, anybody in the NFL could agree with that, even because it just fits for the Detroit Lions. But now talking about Trevor Lawrence and giving him $55 million, you look at some of the things that surround Trevor Lawrence and some of the stats and just information of what he has done so far in the NFL. He has never thrown more than 25 touchdowns in a single year. He just led the NFL with 21 giveaways last season. And I know it's easy to pick out some of these stats that talk down on him. Of course, there is those facts that he led that great comeback in the playoffs. Not this past playoff, but the one before that against the Los Angeles Chargers. That was remarkable. That was top-tier quarterback play. And also, he is almost at the top of a lot of Jacksonville Jaguars stats in franchise history. So there is a lot of positives as well. Just depends on the perspective that you take with Trevor Lawrence. But if you're comparing him to other quarterbacks, just look at someone like Daniel Jones. You look at Daniel Jones and his numbers compared to Jared Goff's in their first 50 starts or through their first 50 games. They're very similar. There's not a huge discrepancy with how Daniel Jones has performed and how Trevor Lawrence has performed. Of course, they've each had to go through different circumstances. Daniel Jones dealing with a bunch of injuries, a lot of coaches coming in and out. Trevor Lawrence having to deal with Urban Meyer that first year, then transitioning to Doug Peterson, having a bit of a smoother transition, not really dealing with a lot of injuries like Daniel Jones has had. But I don't think it's fair to some sense when you're talking about Daniel Jones and people constantly just kill him based on his performances, that he's not good enough for the Giants, they lose because of him, they need to find and draft another quarterback, he's not the answer. But Trevor Lawrence is doing seemingly the same thing, at least production-wise with the stats, and arguably with a better team. I wouldn't say arguably, definitely a better team in the Jacksonville Jaguars, but similar sort of production from both of them, but talked about in very different lights are each quarterback. So that's one thing. And I do acknowledge the opposite side, like I mentioned. Without a decent quarterback, the Jaguars have sort of built this thing around Trevor Lawrence, drafting him number 1 overall. So you would have to restart that progress, and you don't know how long it will be before you find another starting quarterback. That's always the biggest fear, and you will potentially pay more if you wait for Tua and Jordan Love to get an extension, probably Dak Prescott as well. But I only say potentially because this is where you have to take a little bit of a risk. I would imagine if I was in this position in the Jacksonville Jaguars front office and I'm thinking, all right, we have to pay Trevor Lawrence. At the end of the day, I would probably extend Trevor because throwing yourself out there into the big unknown and not knowing who your next quarterback is going to be, that is a scary thought. And being a Steelers fan, I know how bad it could get. So I would want to extend Trevor Lawrence, right? That's the idea. But you have to take it and contextualize it in a way where you're looking at the competition. And this is where the biggest point of this whole discussion comes in that I'm trying to make, is that you look at around the NFL and teams are looking, if you're the Jaguars, you're looking at the Dolphins, you're looking at the Cowboys, and you're looking at the Packers. You're just wanting to get a deal done just based on the fact that they might get more money. They might extend them to $55 million, maybe more than that. And you don't want to be left out and have to pay a lot more for Trevor Lawrence, completely bypassing the idea that has he earned 55, maybe even more than that we can give him? At what point do you ask, are we paying what he has done so far, or are we just paying because we don't want to be the last one to extend our quarterback? I think that's a legitimate question that the NFL is sort of trending into the direction now with these quarterback extensions. And if you're looking around, if I'm the Jacksonville Jaguars, again, I'm looking and I'm thinking, I'm not paying Tua, Jordan Love, probably not even Dak Prescott if I'm the Dallas Cowboys, $55 million. There's no way they get paid that much because, similar to Trevor Lawrence, Tua just had the best year of his career. Led the Dolphins to an 11-6 record. They had a very good regular season, but then once you get to the playoffs, they stunk up the joint. So is he already, after 1 year, earned himself enough around $50 to $55 million? I would probably say no. Then you have Jordan Love, who I think is the closest to that value, just because you are projecting, so you maybe most likely think that he is going to be a top-tier quarterback based on the talent around him, leading this young team, exceeding all expectations. All right, maybe he could get close to that. But again, I don't think after just 1 year the Packers are paying him $55 million per year, or say even more than that at that point after 1 year. I don't think they're doing that. Then even with the Dallas Cowboys, it's one thing if Dak hits free agency and he gets that, maybe even more from a different team that needs a quarterback to really compete, to take that next step. All right, I can accept that. If it's a bidding war, the highest team wins, and if they pay him more than 55, that's fine, because you want Dak, you need a quarterback, that's the final piece of your puzzle. But if you're the Cowboys, I'm not paying Dak 55 because I think CeeDee probably deserves close to what Justin Jefferson's got, and I know Micah Parsons is going to want close to what Nick Bosa has in $34 million per year. We can't afford to have all three of them. And again, like I talked about in the last segment, with Dak, CeeDee, and Micah, if you're to kick one of those players off and have to keep the other two, is it crazy to say that Dak would probably be the least likely to stay on the Cowboys based on the asking price and based on the value of the other two? I don't think so. And then, like I mentioned, if he hits free agency and somebody pays him more than that, that's fine. But it all depends on the situation you're faced with as of now. And also, not to mention, with Trevor and looking at Tua, Dak, and Love, I wouldn't pay them $55 million, but the fact that Trevor got that and all three of them had a better season last year than Trevor Lawrence, again, just raises the question, are we just doing this based on production or just based on the fact that the quarterback can ask for near top of the market price, knowing that the team that he's on has to get it done or else they risk paying a lot more than they really want to give up? It's sort of shifting in the favor of these players, like most, I guess, other sports where the players have a lot of power in deciding their team, a lot of their contracts. I really just think of the NBA and how much power those players have in the league and deciding that they want to move to a certain team or just deciding on some contracts and the supermax and all that sort of stuff. The NFL hasn't really been like that up until, I think, the last year or so, where I think more and more players are getting a lot more power in deciding some of these contracts and deciding big decisions in free agency, like you saw this past free agent, period with Kirk Cousins. Decided not to sign, bet on himself, went out in free agency and got top of the line money. Again, did he deserve that much money already from the Atlanta Falcons? You could say yeah, just because of how long he has played, what he has put on tape. But coming off an injury, new team, and just a lot of newness with a young team coming off that injury, there are still some doubts there. But more and more, I think we're starting to see some players head into that limelight of controlling their own destiny. And it just seems that teams are paying these quarterbacks based on other teams' actions rather than their own evaluation of, all right, have they done enough to earn this contract? Are they potentially going to get better and take us to new heights? Or are we going to just see the same results over and over again? You could say, I know Trevor Lawrence has only played 3 years, so to be fair to him, he could get a lot better. He could, get this Jaguars team to the playoffs, contention for conference championships. That is still not impossible, but again, I asked the question, how much better can he get, and can he get that much better to be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL? I don't think anyone has any facts or any real information to show me or tell me that he can get to that level based on anything that he's done so far. What are you basing that thought of, that he can get to the level of being the highest paid quarterback in the NFL? I think Burrow has earned that to be the highest paid because he has beat the monster in the AFC. He has beaten Patrick Mahomes in those playoffs. He has gone to a Super Bowl. Every time he plays more than 16 to 17 or 16 to 15 games, the Bengals make it to at least a conference championship. That's the level that I think would deem a $55 million contract to be the highest paid quarterback in the league. But Trevor has only made the playoffs once. He has one playoff win, but then last year, bad season overall for the Jaguars. So I don't know. I'm still left in a lot of doubts on how these teams decide on these contracts. It is the market. I know money talks. Obviously, the finances have a massive pull on what teams decide, but I don't know. It's just a weird situation for me. I would have a hard time paying these quarterbacks a lot of money. I know as far as the fear of not having a starting quarterback is and goes, but it's just weird. I don't know if I could do it. I would probably do it, honestly. Just to have a starting quarterback, but I would have trouble sleeping at night, that's for sure. I will definitely not be too happy and be very nervous until that quarterback proves me right. But that's the market. That's the kind of world we're living in the NFL. So who will be the next quarterback to get paid? That's yet to be determined. I know one of them is going to get paid before training camp. I have that feeling, so we're just going to have to wait and see. But that'll do it for this segment. And in the meantime, we will head to another break. And on the other side of that, we're going to talk about some more contract negotiations, this time with a wide receiver in Brandon Ayuk and how he has potentially revealed that those contract negotiations are done. There are no more going forward with those contract negotiations based on a TikTok video that was released today. Stick around to find out more of those details when we return after this short break. Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and talking about the contract extensions, the contract negotiations around the quarterbacks in the last segment. I wanted to now bring up Brandon Ayuk and the wide receiver market and how that is sort of turning out so far. With that, there's been a lot of talk so far, a lot of reports saying that the negotiations are going some way. The 49ers feel that it is positive, where we've seen a lot more pessimistic views from Brandon Ayuk than positive. So who do you trust? Who do you think is in the right here? Well, I think we finally got our answer after this TikTok video that was released today. It's funny, I was mentioning this before in a production meeting we had before this show. Obviously, in the morning, I had my topics laid out on what I was going to talk about, but Then this news came out, and something else I was going to talk about later on in the show came out, and I had to rearrange everything. And I had to talk about this today because it was so ridiculous that, I just had to mention it. I had to give my thoughts on it because it happened right after the production meeting I had this morning, and it had to do around Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk so far has been saying, or at least his trainer and everybody around him have been saying that $30 million is the floor of what a contract extension would look like for Brandon Ayuk, of what he would want in his next contract. Based on what he has done so far, he believes he's earned at least that in the marketplace for the wide receivers. So is that something that the 49ers can fit into their salary cap? Well, I've been doubtful about this deal for a long time. After March went by and almost a little bit of April, I thought this was really just starting to slow up. And also, you give an extension to Juwan Jennings. You give Christian McCaffrey more money. If you really value Brandon Ayuk, I think this would have been done first. But obviously, there's something there. At least in my mind, that's how I was seeing it. But you also had his trainer saying that Brandon Ayuk, his feelings were growing to be pessimistic about an extension with the 49ers. Then also you had this past weekend, Jeremy Fowler reporting on the situation, saying that the contract talks have stalled out. The 49ers are looking like they're not willing to meet the market value for Brandon Ayuk. There's not a lot of optimism around the deal. And for right now, they're going to wait and see what these next 5 to 6 weeks entail for the contract talks to potentially move on. But for right now, there's nothing really going on with that. So everything now is sort of starting to point in that direction. But the final nail in the coffin for me was seeing this TikTok video. I can't show it, obviously, but I will just describe it. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it by now, or you could just find it anywhere. I'm sure, again, it's everywhere by now. But basically, the context of this video was that today, you saw it on a TikTok. I think it was on Brandon Ayuk's TikTok or on somebody's. You saw Brandon Ayuk on a FaceTime call with Commanders starting quarterback, or presumed starting quarterback, Jayden Daniels. They are friends from their Arizona State University days. They played together for a season, so they are friends. They are pretty close. They were just on a FaceTime call, nothing too major going on. And then in the conversation, you see Jayden Daniels ask Brandon Ayuk, what happened? What happened, bro? What's the call for? What do you need to tell me? Then Brandon Ayuk responds by saying, this is the most important bit. He said, they said they don't want me back. Jayden Daniels asks, are you serious? Are you for real? Then Brandon Ayuk responds with, I swear. Not telling a joke, nothing. This is for real. Obviously, he's talking about the 49ers, right? They say they don't want me back. The contract negotiations have been going on for this long. Who else would they be at this point, right? Who else would he be referring to? They don't want me back. Obviously, he's mentioning the 49ers. And Jayden Daniels, if you see the video, overly excited. There has been no connection so far with Jayden Daniels or anything he has to do with the contract negotiations, but very excited for a friend that's just asking what is going on. But I'm going to get to that point in just a second. You see in the video, overly excited for the news that Brandon Ayuk is being for real. So then you dig further into it, and then for me, that just means the 49ers almost have accepted defeat in this negotiation, in this situation with Brandon Ayuk. They may be willing now to entertain some trade offers if more teams see this video. Obviously, everyone's going to see it. Once more teams see this video, and now they're thinking the 49ers are willing to do something if Brandon Ayuk is telling Jayden Daniels that they don't want him back. Did they 100% tell him, confirmed that they don't want him back? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Brandon Ayuk is maybe reading too much into it, but I'm taking it as they did. Like Jeremy Fowler said, according to some sources, not a lot of optimism. The contract talks have stalled out. So you combine that with Brandon Ayuk saying this, I think there is legitimate reason to believe that the 49ers are probably 90%, 85% to accepting that this deal is not going to get done. And more teams are going to look at this and say, well, maybe they're going to entertain a trade now. Maybe you now have the Steelers, the Jaguars, the Broncos, anybody else that needs a wide receiver, the Bills, entertaining trades now with the 49ers because they know the amount of money Brandon Ayuk is asking does not fit with what the 49ers have in mind. Reportedly, they have offered him around $26 to $27 million, but obviously Brandon Ayuk values himself a lot higher than that. And now I get into the point with Jayden Daniels being overly excited. are the Washington Commanders now entering these conversations with the 49ers and seeing if they could get something done. Their general manager, Adam Peters, he comes from the San Francisco 49ers front office. He has prior relationships to that organization, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if, as a general manager now, you reach out to your former team and just ask around, hey, maybe what's going on with Brandon Ayuk? I saw the video. Is there any legitimacy to that? Are you guys really thinking of doing this, moving on from him? What's going on? You have that connection already. You have that in already with the 49ers. Why wouldn't you inquire at least a little bit more? And I think it's a perfect time to really think about Washington as a very likely candidate to try and trade for Brandon Ayuk, especially because I said it, I think, last show on Friday or on Thursday or some point last week that the Commanders have done a great job this offseason of rebuilding, retooling some of that offense, but I would have loved if they got another weapon for Jaden Daniels. I don't want a lot of pressure on Jaden Daniels so far in his first year in a very tough division with the Eagles, the Giants, and the Cowboys. I don't think a lot of pressure on him would be very beneficial for his development. You saw sort of what happened with RG3 and having a quarterback of that skill set and that much talent, how it all sort of broke down. He got injured a lot, carrying that organization. I don't think they definitely don't want that to happen. So to alleviate some of that, I thought they needed another playmaker. And now this door opens up, and I think it's too good of an opportunity to pass up on at this point in time. The combination, the potential wide receiver duo of Terry McLaurin and Brandon Ayuk would be super exciting, super beneficial for Jaden Daniels. One of the most electrifying duos in at least the NFC. You can make a case for the entire NFL, but then you also have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. A bunch of others that are just escaping my mind, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. It's a great opportunity for the Commanders now to really start thinking about this. Does Jaden Daniels have enough power, enough command already with the Washington Commanders to make such a request? I don't know. That is an internal issue, I guess, but Jaden Daniels seemed overly excited, and I can't help but think now that the Commanders are in a great opportunity to try and ask a little bit to the 49ers what is going on with Brandon Ayuk. And also, it does bring up the question a little bit to sort of, relax all the feelings, all the hype that a lot of fan bases probably have now that Brandon Ayuk might be up on the trade market. How much does this drop his value potentially for the San Francisco 49ers? That was one of the things that I thought of right away. When you have a asset so valuable like Brandon Ayuk, something that a lot of people want, but they know they can't have, it makes them want to obviously offer a lot more. But now that Brandon Ayuk has not only said things on his social media, on his Instagram about the contract negotiations not going well, you have the trainer, you have Jeremy Fowler, now you have this video, now you're really starting to believe around the NFL that, this isn't going to work out. It's only a matter of time before Ayuk and the 49ers, part ways eventually, whether that be free agency or whether that be via a trade. It's not going to work out, so let's just buy our time and offer less because, they're not going to work anything out. So there's no point in over-offering anything if they're just going to part ways anyway. It just depends on when it's going to happen. I think it has dropped his value just a little bit slightly because the news is now out, and it stinks for the 49ers because they really held on to this idea that they could keep Brandon Ayuk. Why wouldn't you? But at the same time, they might have overestimated how much, potential there was in these contract negotiations that they've overweighted. And now Brandon Ayuk keeps putting things out there and, airing out the truth a little bit too much. And the value is dropping now for Brandon Ayuk. And now you're not going to have teams offering as much as they would have because they know the truth around the situation. And if I were to guess, the Steelers are probably going to be voiced a lot. I mentioned before, Denver was in contract or in trade talks with the 49ers around the trade deadline. The Jaguars were also close in talks with the 49ers over trades. And I think the Washington Commanders would make the perfect fit as well for Brandon Ayuk to team up with Terry. You already have that connection there with Jaden Daniels. They seem to be very good friends. If you don't think that has an influence, I think that's pretty naive to think that. So I think it opens up a lot more doors. There's going to be a lot more conversation around this because I think it's just a further development in these contract talks. I assume the 49ers will, deny a lot of these allegations, but I think they're just stuck between a rock and a hard place now on trying to figure out anything that ends in a positive for them to at least try and get something out of this deal. You don't want to lose him for free if you just keep waiting until free agency next year and he just walks. I think at this point, the 49ers and the league is sort of forcing their hand a little bit to deal him at least. Just take the best possible offer. Maybe it's not what you expected, but you have to get something back from Brandon Ayuk if you can't keep him. If you've already accepted that you can't extend them, you have to get something back to at least salvage something from the talent that Brandon Ayuk has given you so far. And it's not going to deteriorate the 49ers. It's not like it's the end of the world, honestly. Their roster is very talented already. They drafted a wide receiver. A lot of people thought that drafting Ricky Pearsall was another hint that Brandon Ayuk could be gone, but again, the 49ers denied it. But I think now it's just becoming more and more evident that this is sort of coming to a conclusion. I think it's probably going to happen during training camp or before the regular season, but more exciting news could be on the way regarding Brandon Ayuk. I'm not holding out any hope that it could be the Steelers, but someone's going to get him. I think it's only a matter of time now before he moves on, and I can't wait to see where he goes and how everybody reacts to it, because it's certainly going to be must-see when it does come out. But on that note, we're going to take a break, and when we return, more running back rankings around the NFL, this time in the AFC South, talking about the Titans, the Jaguars, the Texans, and the Indianapolis Colts, and how they all stack up against each other in the running back department. That is coming up right after this break, so we'll be right back. We are back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk some more rankings around the NFL and regarding the running backs. On our second to last stop here on the running back train, we're going to stop at the AFC South and talk about how it's looking in the running back department with the Jaguars, the Titans, the Colts, and the Texans. A lot of new additions and a lot of great potential in this division to get into. So starting off the discussion, obviously, as usual, with number 4, I have the Tennessee Titans. Why the Tennessee Titans? Well, they got Tony Pollard. They have Tajay Spears, the two running backs you see there on your screen. But based on last year, based on having one of the best running backs last year in the NFL in Derrick Henry, they were still middle of the league in terms of total yards, with just recording 1,846 and also around the middle of the NFL in yards per game at 108, which isn't bad. But you obviously lose Derrick Henry. Now you have Tony Pollard stepping into that number 1 running back role. And how much can he pick up and carry the slack from what Derrick Henry was able to do? In terms of just the comparison, Derrick Henry accounted for 1,167 of the total 1,846 yards that the Tennessee Titans produced as a team. So that means Tajay Spears only contributed around 453. And there's only about 700 yards difference between Derrick Henry and what everybody else did in the rushing department for the Tennessee Titans. That's a lot of weight to carry for somebody that's departing the team and now trying to incorporate these new running backs, or expect these two new running backs to have a lot more prominence in your offense. With Tony Pollard now coming in as a number 1 running back, back-to-back years of over 1,000 yards. And I say over 1,000 yards because he technically got that, but I think it was only barely over 1,000, probably 1,034, 1,078, something like that. It wasn't that much more of over 1,000 yards, if that makes sense. When you hear of 1,000 yards, you think, wow, he had a great year. Getting 1,000 yards is huge. And not to discredit him, but I think it doesn't hold the same weight as obviously Derrick Henry getting 1,200 yards, 1,100 yards, and Tony Pollard just exceeding that. But he is a solid addition, not to say that he isn't, but I don't think it stacks up the same when somebody else like a Derrick Henry, like a Saquon, or somebody else like that puts up a lot more. You also have some uncertainties with the offensive line. They've improved it a little bit, but still questionable at the guard position. Can J.C. Latham step in and be a starting tackle already right away as a rookie? Those are some question marks that they have to figure out there, but heading now more into Tyjae Spears and focusing in on him a little bit more, because I don't think Tony Pollard really exceeds being that workhorse number one running back, getting over 30, 25 carries a game. I think you definitely need to spot him to get the best out of him. So how much can Tyjae Spears contribute to the overall group success after a year, or after years, I should say, with Derrick Henry really carrying the work of that running back group? Now I expect Tyjae Spears to sort of step up a little bit more. Different offense, so they might not require that overall, but I think he's still definitely going to have to play a more prominent role if the Titans are going to get the best out of their running back group. Hopefully they prove me wrong, but for now I see them as the number 4 ranked team in terms of running backs in this division, which means moving on to number 3, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars. This division overall was very hard to judge because they all had running back duos. It's not like one team had 3 capable running backs to sort of make the decision a little bit easier for me. All of them had 2 running backs that I was having trouble deciding where they would fit. And I have the Jaguars at number 3 because they had the least amount of rushing yards in this division last year. They were 24th in the NFL in total yards at just over 1,600. They had 96 yards per game as the amount of touchdowns, so that's a positive thing. But in terms of yards, it sort of dipped a little bit from what we saw in the year previous to that. The second leading rusher on the team was Trevor Lawrence, so that wasn't ideal, obviously, if you want to have a really good running back room. I'm only considering running backs as prominent figures to this because Trevor Lawrence isn't really much of a runner. If that was a major part of his game, he is capable of running. He is a good running quarterback when he has to, but I don't think that's incorporated really into his game like it is with Lamar Jackson, like it is with Justin Fields, or these other quarterbacks that really, benefit from that running aspect of their game. Trevor Lawrence is a good athlete. He could get on the move, but that's not part of his game. So for him to be the second leading rusher, I think it raises some questions here. As good as Travis Etienne is, I need to see a little bit more from Tank Bigsby. In his first year, he only had 50 carries as a rookie, and Doug Peterson has stressed that he wants to see more out of him, but to make a big jump from 50 carries to maybe 100 or 150, that is a big ask for somebody in his second year. I'm not saying that he's not ready for it, but to throw that onto him right away, I haven't seen it, so that'll be interesting. And it's too much of this offense, too much of the running game is predicated just on Travis Etienne. We saw how that sort of crippled their team last year when he got injured. Maybe they overworked him last year. He got injured, and then their offense really struggled at that point of the year, the most crucial part of the year. So they're only going to benefit if they could spot Travis Etienne a little bit more. You need to see more from Tank Bigsby, and so far we haven't. There's not enough tape out there to make me confident that he can make that next jump. He could, but for right now, I'm going to keep him at 3 because I'm not so sure what Tank Bigsby has to offer this Jacksonville Jaguars team in a year where they want to get back to being contenders and want to live up to that hype they had at the beginning of last year. So with that in mind, you move on to number 2, and the Houston Texans are number 2 for me because I think in terms of rushing, getting the most out of this rushing attack, they definitely got better with Joe Mixon, moving on from Devin Singletary, bringing in Joe Mixon as that number 1 lead back. But again, I just don't think it's in their repertoire or in their priority list as the number 1 thing to do, especially with this offense being so high-powered in the passing game. CJ has a great arm, established himself as one of the great young quarterbacks. You have Nico Collins, you have Tank Dell, you add Stephon Diggs, you have Dalton Schultz. I think they want to pass the ball and throw it all over the field more so than they want to run it. They definitely can run it, but I just don't think it really fits to their bill of what they're trying to do. They were 22nd last year in the NFL in terms of total rushing yards and in terms of yards per game, averaging less than 100 yards per game. And that was with Devin Singletary. Maybe Joe Mixon changes that a little bit more, but he is definitely an improvement from Devin Singletary and with Dameon Pierce as a number 2 running back. I think that's as good of a situation you can have as in terms of a number 2 ranked or a number 2 running back in your own team. I think that's as good as it gets, but with Joe Mixon, he could definitely put up a 1,000-yard season, but you don't have enough of the ball to distribute, to give Joe Mixon 200 carries, to give Stephon Diggs 1,000 yards, Nico Collins another 1,000, and Tank Dell. Something's going to have to be sort of in balance there, and I think they're going to throw it a lot more than we're going to see them running it. Not because they're incapable of doing it, but it's just not going to fit. And in terms of producing from that running game, that's why I have them at number 2, which means at number 1 it only leaves me with the Indianapolis Colts. Injured last season, both of these guys, so you really couldn't see them together in the backfield, but compared to what I said about Trevor Lawrence, Anthony Richardson fits that mold of running it, being part of his game, running it when he really wants to, not when he just has to, but when he wants to run it and he sees a running lane, he will take it because he is a great runner. He has a huge frame to really punish defenders, honestly, secondary players to make tackles on him. He is a very hard guy to get on the ground, so that is part of his game compared to Trevor Lawrence. I think with Jonathan Taylor, comparing him to other running backs in this division, the level that we've seen Jonathan Taylor get to compared to Travis Etienne, even Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor was in the conversation for Offensive Player of the Year in 2021 when he recorded over 1,800 yards, 18 touchdowns rushing in total, and 20 total touchdowns in that year. He had a case for MVP, even if a lot of people don't want to admit it for being a running back, but he certainly had that conversation, was in that conversation, and reached the highest level compared to any of these other running backs. So you could make an argument that he is the best running back in this division, and with that, having Anthony Richardson, their offense in 2024 is going to be very exciting to watch. With how much they want to run with Anthony Richardson based on his health, that's up to them, but I think they're still going to use him, combine him with Jonathan Taylor, both tremendously talented in that running game, extremely hard to tackle, and now you don't know who has the ball, plus they added more weapons on the outside. I think it's going to make them very prolific in that sense, and they were already the highest ranked team in rushing stats in this division last year, without really having both of these guys in at the same time. They were 10th in the NFL in total yards and in rushing yards per game, so the potential is there. They ranked very high last year. Now you're getting two of your star players back. I think this is going to be a very exciting Colts team to watch, as exciting as it has been in recent years. You add A.D. Mitchell, Michael Pittman, and Josh Downs. Don't sleep on the Indianapolis Colts. Maybe they have some holes on the defensive side of the ball, but offensively, I think in terms of rushing, they could be among the league leaders in 2024. But that'll all have to be proven out there on the field, as always. Let me know what you guys think of my list. Did I take too much of a risk putting the Colts at number 1? I'm high on the Colts. I like what they have, but tell me what you guys think in the comment section during the show or afterwards as well. But that'll do it for that segment. We have one more thing to talk about, more breaking news today. The Pittsburgh Steelers and the entire AFC North Division was announced as the Hard Knocks feature in this year's in-season version of the show. Why was it the AFC North? What are my thoughts on it? I will provide that all after this break on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Back here now on the last segment of the show to talk about some more breaking news that again was announced today. Forced me to rearrange a lot of my segments, but I had to talk about this because as being a Steelers fan, to see that the AFC North was selected as the entire division to feature on Hard Knocks this year. I had to bring it up. Something I wasn't expecting. The NFL and HBO announced today, like I mentioned, the AFC North had been chosen as the entire division to feature on this new look edition of Hard Knocks this season. Was pretty exciting and pretty shocking in my estimation, just because the in-season version of Hard Knocks basically began in 2021 by following the Colts in that year. Then in 2022, they featured just the Arizona Cardinals. And again, last year, they only featured the Miami Dolphins. This is the first time in the history of this series that they will document an entire division for the final 6 weeks of the regular season. Hard Knocks has already announced the two other versions of this show, the off-season version featuring the New York Giants, because they are celebrating their 100th season, so that made sense. They already chose the Chicago Bears as the preseason edition of this show. Again, the attraction of Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, how exciting the Bears could be, that made sense in the preseason, but this in-season version was a lot of people's main focus because it was going to follow that entire division, like I mentioned. And I did a video about this a while ago when they decided to follow an entire division. I had a few candidates in mind. I know I had the AFC West in there just because of Jim Harbaugh, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs looking for a three-peat, the Raiders trying to figure out their quarterback situation, Antonio Pierce, Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins would have made for some great television, and the Broncos figuring out what they were going to do with their quarterback situation, now ushering in a new era. I also had the NFC North in there, but that obviously wasn't going to be the choice at the end of the day because they already chose the Bears as the preseason version, so that was ruled out. The AFC North was definitely up there as a major candidate, but I was sort of hoping it wasn't picked just because, as a Steelers fan, I hate when, just from my personal opinion, I hate when the team is at the center of everything. Everyone's watching what's going on. There's a lot of questions being asked outside of football with some of these extra behind-the-scenes, clips that you get, some, a peek really into what goes on behind the scenes. So I didn't really like that. I didn't really like the spotlight on any of the teams I follow, but I think this was too good of an opportunity to pass up for the NFL and HBO for this division because of the major intrigue you get with this division. And the NFL Films Vice President and the head of content, Keith Cosrow, said in his official statement around this announcement that last season the AFC North became the first division ever to have all four teams finish with a winning record, making it the perfect place to launch this new approach to Hard Knocks. That's what Keith Cosrow said about why they chose the AFC North, but some also, points of intrigue that I thought of on top of this was that obviously all teams had a winning record. 3 of the 4 made the playoffs as well, so after coming off such a successful season and recent success also in years before that, all the entertaining games that the AFC North produces, all the rivalries, it made sense to be the choice here for Hard Knocks. And also the fact that the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Browns have the top 3 toughest schedules in the NFL. That's also another intriguing thing to look at towards the end of the regular season when the playoff race starts to heat up, how those tough schedules sort of impacted these teams and what kind of conversations they have behind the scenes, I think is also very interesting to tune into. Then you have the individual stories that go along with each team. With the Baltimore Ravens, you have Derrick Henry joining that team, them coming off of their first AFC Championship game with Lamar Jackson. How do they sort of rebound and try to get back to that? Then you have the Cleveland Browns with Deshaun Watson. I've talked a bunch about the pressure on him in 2024. How do they manage that? How do they manage the shoulder after coming back from that surgery? And just all the narratives that go around that Cleveland Browns team of trying to get past some of the earlier rounds of the playoffs. The Cincinnati Bengals, the contract negotiations, the dynamic, the personal relationships that go on with T. Higgins, trying to negotiate an extension with Jamar Chase, also an extension looming in the near future. That'll be interesting to watch with those conversations. And also the Pittsburgh Steelers with adding Justin Fields, adding Russell Wilson, George Pickens in another season, a lot of new coaches coming in, Patrick Queen coming in, a very different Steelers team that a lot of people will certainly want to tune into and, figure out how that quarterback competition is sort of determined late in the year. And the Ravens also, with some of the history around Hard Knocks, the Ravens were the first team ever to feature on Hard Knocks back in 2001. The Cleveland Browns have already been on the show one time, with Cincinnati also being on 2 times prior to this year. This is the first time ever that the Pittsburgh Steelers will be on Hard Knocks, so that's another intriguing thing to tune into, to watch a deeper, video content into the Pittsburgh Steelers, because they're an organization that I feel like keeps a lot of things close to their chest. You don't really get to see the conversations behind the scenes with Mike Tomlin, with some of their big name players, so that'll certainly be something to watch. And just my overall thoughts, my final thoughts on this, it all makes sense now. It all makes sense why the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Browns all have the toughest schedules in the NFL. This was always going to be the case, obviously, with HBO and the NFL deciding on what division to pick. What brings the best content, what will make for the best showings late in the year, giving 3 of the 4 teams in this division the hardest schedules, and also the Steelers not playing a division game in the first 10 weeks and saving it basically for the last 6 weeks of the regular season. Again, no coincidence. It all lines up perfectly with how the show's laid out following the last 6 weeks of each of these teams in the division. I'm a little bit salty about it. At least now I understand why and how they made this decision to have 6 of their last 8 games be in the AFC North. I'm not complaining. I'm confident in the Steelers and performing well, but I just wanted to know why that is. Very strange as to why all the games were just pushed back to the last month and a half of the regular season, but at least I got my answer. Is it a good one? One that I was expecting? Probably not, but as a Steelers fan, I don't love it, but it should overall, non-biased, it should be very awesome to watch all these storylines come together. And also, with a tough schedule, hopefully all these teams are in contention by the time this show goes on air in the final 6 weeks of this, program. It could be that 1 or 2 teams sort of slip up and maybe you don't follow a division that you thought was going to be as competitive, but I'm confident in this division. All these teams always seem to be around the playoff race, and it should be very exciting. I think it's going to be great, but you set the bar pretty high, so to exceed this, I think it's going to be a very hard thing to do in years to come. But, on the flip side, you start with the best, you get the most fans in, tuning in week in and week out. So, it has its benefits and its negatives, but this show is set to debut on December 3rd with the first episode following these teams over the last 6 weeks. So, again, make sure to tune into that. I'll certainly be watching, and how it all plays into the dynamic of the regular season football and what's shown on these shows will certainly be very exciting to watch. Let me know what you guys think about the AFC North being chosen as the division to feature on Hard Knocks. Do you hate it? Do you love it? Are you a fan of one of these teams? I am, so I have mixed feelings about it, but let me know, as always, what you guys think. But in saying that, that'll do it for this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and also check out other platforms on social media like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X for more of the network's content, as well as tuning into both YouTube channels, the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, for even more content around myself and this show as well. As a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football discussions with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys again for joining me, and I hope to see you guys back here again with me tomorrow.